We oppose the military intervention in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Guinea. But one cannot oppose the military intervention without opposing France and the United States and their militarization of the region. This recent destruction of civilian power and civilian leadership in Niger is one of the 9 sequences that has developed since the war on terror in that region. The fabrication of terror, the intervention of the United States and France in the region, and the consequences of the destruction of Libya and the financing of groups, military groups in the region by France. This military intervention in Niger is a consequence of the militarization of Nigerian society when the society needs social and economic reconstruction. The United States has pumped more than $1 billion into this region, into military facilities and military programs, and supporting military elements in this region. In Niger alone, the United States has spent $500 million building a military base and military and drone facilities in Agadez to support French exploitation of the mineral human resources of Niger. So we cannot discuss what's going on in Niger without discussing the call by the African people for the expulsion of France from West Africa. The foreign minister of Mali has called on the United Nations to investigate France in the region. The former prime minister of Italy has called for sanctions against France. And it is the right-wing conservative forces in the United States that is supporting France, to the point where now we see the conservative wing of the Biden administration, led by Victoria Nuland and Antony Blinken, leading the discussions on Africa. Why is it that Victoria Nuland was in Niger on Monday and Victoria Nuland is in South Africa? The Biden administration has African expert. They named Johnny Carson as their expert on Africa at the last US-Africa summit. But it's Victoria Nuland, the hawk that wants to militarize the planet Earth, who is a rabid militarist, who is now flying between Nigeria, Niger, and South Africa, carrying out US policies. The task is for the left and progressive forces in this country to call for the removal of the United States Africa Command from Africa, the closing of the US military facilities in Niger, and to support the people of Niger in removing France from Niger, just as the people of Burkina Faso and Mali has done. And we should support the call for federation between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Well, Niger is one of those states that has suffered from French military intervention and destruction in the region. The French are inordinately dependent on the exploitation and plunder of Africa. The French has military personnel in Niger. When their military personnel were thrown out of Mali and Burkina Faso, they were redeployed to Niger, and they were stoned on the way to their bases in Niger. The France has exploited the mineral and natural resources of Niger. The French uranium mines in Niger not only exploited the uranium resources of Niger, but France has also closed mines and left radioactive material that is deleterious to the health and safety of the Nigerian people. Now, everyone in West Africa is calling for the ending of the CFA franc and the domination of the economies of West Africa by France. They're calling for the removal of the 240,000 French personnel in West Africa. In the case of Niger, France is opposed to any plans for the reconstruction of the country. Let's take the major plan in this region for the reconstruction of the country. That is the replenishing of Lake Chad. you started this news broadcast this morning by talking about a fire in Hawaii. Those kinds of fires are going on all across West Africa because of global warming. Global warming has accelerated the depletion of Lake Chad. Lake Chad has lost 95% of its water resources. There's a plan by the Lake Chad Basin Authority to replenish Lake Chad. Who is against this? France. Who is against investment in reconstruction in West Africa? France. Who has been supporting, who allegedly has been supporting terror groups in West Africa? When the United States called for investigation into Boko Haram, it was revealed in the Nigerian newspapers that the French has been supporting Boko Haram in Nigeria. So the French create terrorist groups and then goes into African countries to say they are fighting terrorism in Africa. This kind of duplicity by France and fomenting terror and destruction has been challenged by the peoples of West Africa. In every country in West Africa, they're calling for the ending of French economic, financial, and military domination. So we in this country must call on our representatives and our political forces who are progressive. For example, Ocasio-Cortez, who is a progressive member of Congress. When she was a student, she went into Niger. Why are they not raising their voices against the militarism and militarization of West Africa by the United States military, and to call for investments in health, reconstruction, water supply, and the safety of the people of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali? The United States, France, is gung-ho about reversing a military coup in Niger. What about the military coup in Sudan that has been supported by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates? What about the destruction of the military in Sudan against the peoples of Sudan, calling for the restoration of democratic relations? We cannot be selective in our opposition to militarism. We must oppose militarism of all sorts in Africa, but the priority at this moment is for the removal of France and to call on the United Nations to have sanctions against France for its destruction and militarism in Africa. The United States of America has been involved in what they call a war on terror, which is, in the words of Jerry McKinnon, a fabrication in West Africa. The people who are called terrorists, in many cases, are people who were supported by France. In the case of the destruction of Libya, the United States and France removed Gaddafi, and now the United States and France are fighting on both sides of the war in Libya. After the destruction of Libya, the Tuareg left Libya and went into Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. The French supported groups that are supposed to be terror groups, and then the United States started what they call the Trans-Sahara Counter-Terror Initiative and spent $500 million on that counter-terror initiative. The United States then went into Niger to build a military base and a drone base in Agadez. The United States needs to remove its military forces from Africa and to support the peace, social justice forces in Africa who are fighting for reconstruction in that part of the world. So the United States itself is a force for destruction against the peoples of Africa at the moment. The political consciousness of the peoples of Africa at the moment, this consciousness has been heightened by the conjuncture of the global capitalist crisis, the investments for billionaires, the climate crisis, COVID-19, and the general immiseration of the African peoples. Thomas Sankara was a military leader in Burkina Faso, and that's why though we condemn military coup d'etat, we do not have a knee-jerk reaction against all military leaders, because within the ranks of the military in Burkina Faso are the heirs of Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara was a leader who organized the people of Burkina Faso to bring safety, security, sanitation, peace to that country, and it was about how to mobilize the people of West Africa against French imperialism. And through French and Ivorian machinations, Thomas Sankara was killed. The military in Burkina Faso still has some of the sentiment and consciousness of Thomas Sankara. But what was being said by the leader of Burkina Faso is now reflected all across West Africa. In Senegal, the anti-French, anti-imperialist sentiments are very high, and the highest anti-imperialist sentiment in Africa at the moment is to be found in the Sudan, where the revolution in the Sudan has mobilized the people into resistance committees that overthrew the military. So Burkina Faso, Sudan, Mali, and now Niger are countries where the room for developing the political consciousness of the people and strengthening the anti-imperialist bloc in Africa is very strong. Last week, the EFF in South Africa had its 10th anniversary Congress. And if you listen to the speech of Malema, the anti-imperialist speech, you get a sense of the sentiment all across Africa about imperialism, about the need for African unification, harnessing the resources of Africa, and to ensure that Africa is not drawn into any new wars. What we are seeing in Nigeria is that the Nigerian government, which many in Nigeria call the present government illegal, this government in Nigeria needs an intervention in Niger and in Burkina Faso and Mali in order to get favor from the United States of America so that Tinubu can be in power. The people of Nigeria, they're against this military intervention. The Senate of Nigeria said they should not intervene. They said there should be dialogue. The people of Nigeria, the people of Niger are one. So what the Burkina Faso leader said in Russia at the Russia-Africa Summit is a sentiment of the peoples all across Africa about Western military intervention in Africa, and trained by this money that the United States is supposed to be spending on counterterror. I think that is why we need greater investigation in what the United States is doing in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Guinea, and to call for closing of the United States Africa Command, and for there to be greater relations between the civilian societies in Africa and the peoples of the United States. The United States Africa Command needs to be removed from Africa, because the United States Africa Command has been responsible for part of the sequences of militarism in West Africa. The African peoples have been fighting for self-determination. The African peoples have been calling for the unification of Africa. The African peoples have been calling for the African currency so that they are not sending billions of dollars, up to $48 billion every year to Western European countries. The African countries want freedom of movement. They're creating the Africa Continental Free Trade Community. The United States, France, the European Union, all foreign powers are against Africa uniting and creating roads and railways and ports for the African peoples. The overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya was directly related to the plan by the African Union for an African currency. An African currency that prevents the outflow of resources from Africa is a threat to France, the European Union, and the United States of America. And that is why the United States is creating the bogey about China, and the United States is intensifying militarism in Africa. Next, this war in Ukraine, it is a terrible war against the peoples of Ukraine and that region. But that war in Ukraine is another step of the militarization of the planet, where the United States is supporting the fascist elements in Ukraine. Now, Africans have taken a position that they do not have any dog in this fight. They want peace in Ukraine. The United States is threatening Africans with the countering Russian malign influence in Africa. They've actually passed a bill in Congress to coerce Africans to support the United States and the NATO war in Ukraine, when Africans are calling for NATO to be accountable for the destruction of Libya. In South Africa in particular, where there will be the BRICS summit the next week, where Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are coming together to break the domination of the United States over the world economy. The United States is threatening the South African government. It's not by accident that Victoria Nuland went from West Africa to South Africa. They've been threatening the South African government and making allegations that South Africa is selling arms to Russia. All of these are fabrications. The United States is now leaning on Kenya to send soldiers to Haiti. The United States is calling on Kenya to sign a strategic trade investment partnership with Kenya to break up the plans for greater cooperation in Eastern Africa. So the United States is running amok in Africa based on challenging China. The African people do not need the United States to tell them to challenge China. What the people of Africa needs is to plant food to end hunger. They want jobs, they want roads, they want health care, and they want tangible resources internationally to fight climate change. This is the most important crisis globally. So we in this part of the world need to join with the African peoples supporting peace and reconstruction, supporting the replenishment of Lake Chad, and do not support France and the United States in the destruction of Africa.